Welcome to another episode of Corporate CPR, where we breathe life back into your organization, projects, and processes, giving you insights to recovery and avoiding corporate mortality events. Today, we'll be talking about how perfectionism might be killing your company, and joining us to contribute to the conversation is Jessica Osborn. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you for having me, Jana.
Yeah, so glad you could join us. Can you share about your background, please?
I'd love to. So I've spent the last 17 years of my career helping both businesses and individuals achieve successful outcomes. And what that means professionally is I am in the field of customer success, which is about helping companies achieve successful outcomes. And my true passion, though, is actually helping my team members achieve their career outcomes and goals. And so I've helped over 27 of my team members either position themselves and move into leadership roles or into cross-functional roles aligned to their career objectives.
Awesome. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about perfectionism. I think most people are probably familiar with the word, but in what context are you, really interests you about perfectionism in the workplace?
Yeah, so I think starting off, I am a recovering perfectionist. So I have personal experience with this topic. And from my perspective, I am really passionate also about building high performing teams. And one of the things in doing that I've really learned is that perfectionism will often get in the way of individuals, of teams, of the ability for whole organizations to innovate and stay relevant. And so I think there's really kind of multiple layers where that plays. And I look forward to diving into that with you.
Excellent. Well, and so, I think there's a lot of people out there who would, call themselves type A or a perfectionist. And so maybe we just start there. Like, what are the challenges you see in the workplace when you have a leader who's a perfectionist?
Yeah. So I would say when you have a leader who's a perfectionist, you're setting really high standards for your team. And high standards are not a bad thing in and of themselves. I think it's about the approach that then comes with that. So, for example, I've seen situations where a perfectionist leader will pretend like they know all of the answers. As humans, it's not possible to know absolutely everything, but sometimes we like to convince ourselves that we should. And in those situations, oftentimes they're also afraid of being vulnerable. And so even admitting where they're struggling becomes a challenge. And what happens then is that person tends to get quite isolated. They can kind of spiral in their own head, the anxiety builds up. And oftentimes it really paralyzes that person towards taking the steps they need to solve whatever challenges that they need to in their day-to-day workings. And it can really set an atmosphere for the team that ends up really creating this anxiety that everyone's feeling. Everyone's not really sure which direction to go. And it really just, it takes away from the ability for the team to gel and achieve what it needs to together.
In your perspective, what is the difference between, I guess, quality then and perfectionism?
I think the difference between quality and perfectionism is probably a mindset, to be honest. So I think you can have targets and standards and expectations that you proactively communicate to your team. In fact, I'd say if you're not doing those things, that might be concerning. But on the flip side of it, perfectionism is if you mess up and you don't achieve your target, it's not okay. It's kind of this mindset that everything has to be perfect before we even start. And it can really lead to, you need to just get something done. But instead, it's like, oh no, this has to absolutely be perfect. And you end up spending hours and hours and you never actually get to the thing that you need to do because it's not perfect yet. And so, does that kind of make sense, the difference between quality and perfectionism?
Yeah, I guess, to me, it sounds like the people who are, it's interesting. I guess I haven't identified so much those as the perfectionists. It's as more as the people who are just over analytical, right? Who have to have all the pieces in place. Um, like you said, before you can make a decision or before you can get started. And there's value. I'm more of the type who's like, oh, let's figure it out as we go. Which there can be downfall to that as well, right? Like if you don't have enough information, you can end up in the wrong spot. But on the other hand, I really like what um, um, uh, just drew a blank on his name. Good, Jim. Good. I can't.
The
I can't.
Jim Collins, Good to Great.
Yeah, Jim Collins. There we go. Not good. Well, I don't know if it was Good to Great or which one it was. Sorry, but it was where he was talking about shoot bullet holes and then cannonballs, where it's like you go test a bunch of different things and you go see where you should then put your energy in versus focusing, everything into one area and then end up in the wrong spot, or as you're saying, not even getting started.
Yes, I think that's a really great point. And I over exaggerated of like never getting started. Maybe you do, but I think to your point, if you put all of your eggs in one basket, and then sometimes I think another thing that happens when you do that is you're not even willing to acknowledge when it is failing, and you just keep going down the same path as opposed to pivoting because you're just so committed to, well, we said we are going to do this thing and we're doing this thing. And I think when you let go of the perfectionist mentality or the I know everything mentality, you can also free yourself up to say, okay, well, we tried this big thing and it's not working. So now we're going to try these other three things and see what works better. And so it gives you more creative flexibility to find the solution, move forward, empower your team to help you to move things forward because you're not controlling everything. You're letting other people around you support. So I think it's really kind of getting out of your own way by being more open, honest, vulnerable, and also just less obsessed with it all has to go right. Like sometimes the best way to do something you find out right after you fail terribly. And then you just acknowledge that, you own it, you figure out what to do about it. Because I think that's the other thing. Failure is not a permanent state. And so being able to admit when things fail, talk about it openly, make it okay, but then also have the expectation, well, we're not going to sit in failure, we're going to do something about it. And so I think that's the other aspect of it is the comfort with failure and the willingness to move through that.
When you look at, I guess, from a perspective of, you get started on something and, you get past that, whatever the initial assessment is, et cetera, and finally get started. Do you see a problem with these people actually completing things as well?
Um, it's a good question. And it's like when we say these people, I want to like bring myself back into that place because I think that's what happens too. It's like, oh, these people fail, these people, it's like we all have some of these tendencies.
Mm,
And so I want to bring it back to like we've all been there. So I would say, yes, sometimes I'll own it myself. Sometimes I don't finish a project, but I would say that like if you acknowledge that something's not working and you're going to try something else, and so you decide not to finish it, that's okay, right?
right,
And I think
right.
and I think it's this openness to setting the expectation on the team that you're operating within. Here's the objective. And I think that's the other thing that goes along with this. You do need to have clear objectives, what you're trying to do. You still have those standards, but you create this mentality on the team that it's okay to fail as long as we fail fast and we learn from it and we move past it. And we're going to try something. We're going to try it long enough that we know if it actually works, but it's okay for us to acknowledge it didn't work, stop it, and move on to the other thing. So I do think that yeah, sometimes you might not finish something or you might not be able to get started on something when you have the perfectionist mentality, but by shifting it into more of a agile mentality, you can move through that.
And so you mentioned that this was something you struggled with once upon a time. And so I guess how did you identify that it was a struggle for you?
Honestly, I had a really great mentor and boss, Pat Phelan, shout out to Pat, who gave me a performance review where he actually told me, a lot of people say this like really fancy phrase of don't let perfect be the enemy of good enough. And
Mm,
he actually simplified it even more to like done is better than good, Jess. which I mean is a very simple, but I needed it because I was so focused on really making everything come together so well, that he lowered the bar enough. I still had such a high bar, but he lowered it enough to where I could then have that be a mantra and just focus on getting stuff done and putting things out there and being able to then see what happens with it and evolve from it. So really good mentorship is how I kind of like realized that I had the issue and started to work on it. But then I've used it so much since then. So that was probably 13 years ago in my career when I got
Mhm.
that performance review. And even today, I will find myself working on something and it's like, am I spending too much time on this, or could there be a iteration of this that would get the job done? And I'll challenge myself to make sure that I actually finish something, get it out the door versus make sure that it's perfect and wait a longer time to do it.
Mhm. And so, what are there key? I know you just mentioned a couple, but kind of key strategies then that have helped you that help you on a day-to-day basis doing that?
Yeah, so I would say I'm a big one for you need to always have the big picture in mind. So remembering why you're doing something in the first place and being able to check what you're doing against that big picture is helpful, because then you can sometimes realize, well, I'm getting perfectionist tendencies towards this thing that doesn't really matter when I think about the big picture thing over here. So I think keeping perspective, the big picture is one tip. Then it's just really checking in with yourself. If you're kind of finding yourself obsessing and working on something for ridiculous amounts of hours, sometimes you need to do that, right? We always have to roll up our sleeves and get something done sometimes. But if you find yourself taking longer than you were intending to, or you're struggling with it, kind of just that self-awareness to ask, okay, am I being overly perfectionist about this? Could there be a simpler way to do this? And just creating that space. And sometimes, breaking up your if you're really obsessively getting into your head on something, going on a walk and then coming back and then using that big picture to kind of think about it can really help. And then I would say also just creating time for reflection. So um, I tend to have a cycle of every quarter as I'm planning. I'll kind of think about, okay, well, what did we say we were going to achieve this quarter? How do we do against that? And are these the right things to be focused on? What in a retrospective of like, what did we learn from it? And this is something you can do with your team too, where you bring them into the retrospective and you can talk about, well, we spent too much time on this project when we really should have been focused on this one, or we really learned this lesson from the failure that we had. So creating that reflection time can then help you as you're continuing to iterate to make sure that what your work product is getting better and better with the learnings that you're taking.
Do you have you seen this as a culture within an organization? Like, as in the whole culture in the organization is perfectionism, and what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say I've seen a lot of different business cultures, particularly being in customer success. So I not only have the companies that I've worked for, but also the businesses that I've worked with. And I would say that yes, some organizations out there have very high standards in terms of how they operate, and they hire all type A people, and they're very focused on achievement. Um, and I think, if we look even broader than my own personal experience, if you look at certain industries, there are industries where perfection is important, where in healthcare and aviation, making mistakes have catastrophic consequences. But what I find interesting is there are studies, there's a really well-known one, situation in the healthcare industry where the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality had to kind of intervene and let hospitals know that they could not create a punitive environment for reporting errors, and also that patient health was being impacted by people being afraid to admitting mistakes. And so even in places where there need to be high standards, you also have to have the safety to admit where failure is happening, to report that, and then to be able to take corrective action in those areas.
But I mean, I guess wouldn't the key be to define? I mean, I think there is a difference between standards and perfectionists, right? Like standards are like,
Yeah.
what's the, for lack of a better term, minimum expectation, and every company will have that. And you're right, like some have to have a very low tolerance for variation, like space shuttles, uh, um, medical what facilities, pharmaceuticals, or whatever, right? So you want a very low tolerance for deviating from those standards, and other organizations could have a higher tolerance. But if the standards are defined, I guess perfectionism is really going beyond the standards, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's that mindset of it's that almost that paralyzing fear of failure where you think, okay, if there's a negative adverse event that happens, I'm going to just shove it under my psychological rug
Mm,
versus face the music about it, because I'm so afraid of what's going to happen if I fail. That was the experience I had it with it,
mm,
where even just if I was in a situation where something had gone wrong, and we were doing a retrospective on it. It's the willingness just to say, hey, yeah, I made a mistake. I've learned from it. This is what I'm going to do about it. I used to have a personal fear of
mm.
just even saying that and doing that. And I think it was because I really wanted to be the best all of the time. And I was like, oh my gosh, if I fail, this is not okay. And what's interesting is I don't think I'm alone in this. I was looking at, there are a lot of studies out there with the correlation of burnout and being hard on yourself in your own head, about and kind of self-critical in these situations. And so I think that's what I mean by perfectionism. It's not standards as we've just articulated, but it's that mindset of like, nothing can go wrong. Like I will not fail no matter what. And
Mm.
that's what leads to, I think, a lot of adverse outcomes.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think, failure, I mean, regardless if you're a perfectionist or not, right? Failure can be embarrassing. So I
Yeah.
think a lot of people do have a challenges, I think, with admitting when they've failed, because you just don't want to look bad for whatever the reason is, right? So have you seen companies do, like, create good culture, like, around being able to fail um um y- and iterate on that, versus people who are just afraid, like you were talking about the first study, where they're so afraid of the consequences that they won't you know fail
Mhm.
out loud. Fail out loud, let's call it that.
Feel out loud. Yeah. No, I've definitely seen this. So I've been in both cultures where you felt like if you messed up that, you would lose your job. And, there was kind of a culture of a little bit of like an undercurrent of fear. And I mean, that feels like a pretty toxic environment. And it tends to cascade from the top leadership. And what I've seen is it's typically the people who believe that they have all of the answers who then underneath them have these teams that feel like they have to act that way too, and it just kind of cascades down. So that's the environment you really want to avoid happening at your company. And then the ones that are better about this, I think a lot of tech companies are very focused on this fail fast concept and have used it. And the Agile framework really is in support of this. And so I think there has become like a business culture around failure's okay, but it's what you learn from it and move forward. And I think tech is probably one of the prevalent sectors um, that has really put that forward. But yeah, culture at a company, I think it also comes from just the behaviors that are modeled by the top leadership. Like
Mm,
the company I'm currently at, Go Cardless, our CEO Hiroki got on stage at our big all company experience called GC Live, and talked about some of the learnings from the year, apologized for some of the things that didn't go as well as he wanted it to and why, and really just took
Mhm.
full ownership of challenges that we'd faced, and the amount of positive reaction to that, because it was so human. It was not this, I'm on stage, so I know all the answers and you guys are going to listen to me. It was very like open and human. And he also said thank you to all of us for the support that we had, really given him in the business through some challenging times together. So I think
Mm.
the point is owning your failures, even in grand scales like that. I think it really is that vulnerability that people are looking for these days. I don't think people still want to see the leaders who know everything. I actually think they
Right.
don't believe leaders who know everything. And in fact, they create these really terrible cultures. And so I think we're in this shift where the more you can own what's not working, what you've personally contributed to it, be open and honest about it, ask for help. I think all of
Mm.
those are really healthy towards creating high performing teams.
Well, and so I was that kind of is a segue into what my next question was going to be is like, as a leader, then how how do you help a team and enable them to, um, not not feel caught up in perfectionism?
Yeah, I think it's so just like Hiroki set the example for me, I've tried to do the same with my team in terms of so for example, at the beginning of our team meetings, we have a check-in section called wins and oopses. And
Mm.
so we celebrate both the wins that happened the week and then also that, uh-oh, there's something we did that wasn't great, and here's what we learned about it. And so we're
Mm.
celebrating the is alongside the wins. So that's a pretty tactical and simple one. And I participate in that. I was like, here's my oops for the for the week.
Mm.
And so then it's like it's a safe environment for us to admit that. But then also on that call, everyone's learning from the oops so that we're less likely to repeat that oops, right? So I think that's the kind of thing that I think can really help make it a safe space for the team. And I think just openly stating things like when I'm giving guidance to a team member where it's been a tough situation, acknowledging the situation, acknowledging the plan that we need to do about it, and then letting them know it's okay. Like, because
Mm.
I can see certain team members I have, and this as you meet with your team, some people are harder on themselves than others. And I
Mm.
tend
For
to
sure.
be able to tune into the ones that are being too hard on themselves. And I put stuff in context for them. I say, hey, by the way, I know this has been a tough negotiation, but remind yourself that you're negotiating with one of the largest businesses in France and you're talking to procurement people who do this for a living. And, this is your fifth negotiation. Like you're doing a freaking great job. So things like that, just so that they know that, in their head, they're being really hard on themselves. But actually, when you
Mm.
step back, it's impressive work.
Well, and I guess, I know you kind of already answered this, but I just want to, because I'm just thinking about like one of my challenges, is like we do a lot of project management, right? And so it, I've run into instances where, I'm asking myself, am I being unreasonable or really should I have this expectation and should I be driving this with the team? And I'm just wondering if you do anything to help, you know, or if you have that similar type of experience and what you do to kind of answer that question.
Yeah, I'm nodding furiously because yes, I have that experience all of the time because I'm a really competitive person. I really
Mm.
love hitting targets. I work with commercial targets, and when you're maniacally focused on making something happen, it's easy to like just got to put the pressure on, got to put the pressure on. And I honestly think because I'm that kind of person, I've had to put a lot of thought into how I then also add perspective and create environments that while are competitive and focused, aren't overly so to the point where you're burning everyone out around you.
Mm.
And so I think you have to continuously be clear on what you're trying to achieve and making sure that the team is aware of that and is working on it. and then balance it with the human. So I think you're like, and I think this is, by the way, the challenge that almost all managers have. And one of the things that I read up on is that HBR, Harvard Business Review, said that 50% of managers tend to burn out because of the pressures of balancing that kind of situation. So I think it's the challenge of management to basically be able to push, but then
Mm-hmm.
also to give. And it's that constant balance of like push the team towards objectives, but also give the space for learning, give the space for it's okay to mess up. And it's just
Mm.
this back and forth between those two things to get where you need to go.
Did you do specific tactics to build that type of trust, or was it just, you choosing to be vulnerable then allowed other people, to feel comfortable doing it? Or was there anything else that you guys did to build that type of trust among each other?
That's such a great point. I think that in business, we spend so much time on the content of the job that we forget
Mm,
that we're all humans and that the relationship that we have with each other matters almost as much as what we're doing together every day. And so I would say I'm lucky because as a customer success oriented person, I have to build relationships quickly with people. That's part of the job. And so I've got strong relationship building skills, and so I've been able to use that as an individual in my leadership skills. But in addition to that, I will say I've been part of a lot of businesses that have either invested in the team building and or I've fought for the budget to do the team building with my teams, where we take a day out from our normal day to day and we bring in a facilitator and we spend the time actually building ourselves as a team. So we're not just focusing on the content, we're also focusing on our relationships. And that has
mm,
paid dividends because I think ultimately, team is a hard thing, and it doesn't just happen overnight, and you need to put time and effort into it. And I think the
mm,
foundation of relationships, but also that space to develop those, and even spending time outside of the office, going to dinner, or doing a team event, a volunteer event, things like that. People get to know each other as humans, and if you make space for the human and you acknowledge the human, then that's the give that then allows you to get right. So that's that
mm,
tension, the push versus the pull with the team.
mm. And what do you think are the things that get in the way then of somebody that holds them back from making a change in this area?
I think change is hard, and different individuals deal with it differently. I think also self awareness varies from individual to individual, and like
Mm,
ability and willingness to have a growth mindset to where you're using your self awareness to try different things varies from individual to individual.
mm,
And I purposely try to hire people who are driven and have a growth mindset with priority, because what I found is people with fixed mindset who don't want to hear the feedback end up being the ones that really struggle as an environment is growing, as you're really pushing the team. And so I think everybody can get to a growth mindset. I never want to limit the potential that somebody has. I think everybody has potential, but I just think it's where
mm,
somebody is in their life, and if they're willing to shift their mindset, and if they're willing to take on the challenge to do things differently. And yeah, vulnerability, it doesn't come easy. It's a really brave thing to do, to be that open and honest about like that little internal part of you that's imposter syndrome, giving you a really hard time. But once you do it, it's so refreshing, the type of connections you have with people, and I just think it really deepens the ability to work as a high performing team.
and I know it's a very common phrase out there, but I wouldn't mind if you took a moment to define growth mindset a little bit.
Sure. So the idea is mindset versus fixed mindset. So a growth mindset believes that whatever the circumstance is, it can be changed. And so it helps with things like resilience, because it's like, okay, so we tried this A growth mindset person, if it failed, would say, okay, so what else can we try? And so if you get knocked down, you're going to, it's like that Chumbawamba song. You get knocked down, you get back up again. I would say that's what a growth mindset person does, versus
Mm.
a fixed mindset person would probably look to blame, well, these customers are such a pain. It's their fault. Like I just have a really bad book of business, or, this circumstance is just never going to be successful, and so they give up because it's like, well, it is what it is. It's fixed. This is the thing. So I'm just going to keep moving. And I find fixed mindset folks really just are not as able to figure out when you're in a state of failure, what do you do next? They just kind of stay where they are.
Mm.
And so I think fixed mindset, I really struggle with it. If I'm honest, like the people with fixed mindset, I've continuously struggled with, and I've confronted it and tried to help them see it, and they have to be ready. And I think that's the thing about
Mm.
influencing people. You can only influence them so much, and then they have to kind of take the ownership of their own journey. And so, it's a tough one.
Um, yeah, there's we actually another, sorry, the sun's coming in. I'm sure I'm turning bright now. Um, it's a little distracting. Anyway, one of the things that I've noticed, like, so my daughter, some right kids, right, as they're growing, she's definitely had moments of fixed mindset. I can't do it, right? Math's too hard, whatever, right? And that's kind of the quintessential, definition, I suppose, of growth mindset. I just can't. But in the business where I've been seeing it creep in a lot is, you know, where realistically, like given the conditions that you have, maybe you can't do something, but people aren't being creative into thinking about how they can, right? Like, oh, we landed this. There's this opportunity, and it requires this, and this. Oh, we can't do it. We don't have the people, or But well, fine. But is there a way that we can think creatively about this, so we can service the client, not lose the deal? I don't know if you've seen see that
Oh,
too. And
I mean, it's the name of the game. It's the name of the game
mm,
where I am. Yeah, I think, and honestly, I think customer success has, because basically what you do in customer success is a lot of solving problems with customers, figuring out how to get the organization to help a customer do the thing that they need to do. And so you spend your whole career navigating these challenging situations with multiple stakeholders, and you often will have the legal department or the finance department,
mm,
or a lot of the departments that are a bit more rigid in terms of how they operate, and you have a barrier towards what you're trying to achieve in a particular situation. You have to find a mutually
mm,
beneficial solution for all parties. And so, yeah, I think, absolutely. I think that's definitely something that happens in especially large organizations, like you were mentioning, 1,000-person organizations. I think the larger organizations get, the more you'll have pockets of this
mm.
mentality, right? Like we're so big, it's no. Whereas growth mindset will help you be able to figure out, well, how could we make this happen?
Well, and I was just thinking, yeah, like it can be almost like a disease, though. Like when you said that you see it a lot in the big companies, I literally was just thinking about how this fixed mindset is almost like a disease, because it's easier just to be like, oh, he can't do it, right? And or you'll hear a leader say, oh, we can't do it, and so then you'll just trust that, oh, they must be the one, they must know, right? They must be right. I guess we can't do it.
Exactly. And then once one person says no, to your point, like it's easier job when it's just like, nope, no, no, versus figuring out, okay, well, this is how it's built, but how do we build it
Mm,
differently so that it accommodates this? And so, yeah, it's absolutely something that I think culturally catches on at businesses and can really slow businesses down. Whereas I think, honestly, as we've been talking about it, it's really perfectionism leads to fixed mindset, whereas more of a fast failure mentality is a growth mindset. And so it's like basically trying to overcome that fixed perfectionist to get more towards growth so that the business can grow and thrive.
mm, exactly. Um, well, so what do you think is the biggest thing that then you would give to a leader in assessing their organization around this? Like, how do they know whether or not they have this problem?
Yeah, I think it's, I guess I would look at what is the most recent initiative that we've put in place to drive an outcome for the business, and how successful has that been? It's really fascinating that I think it's something like 70% of change management initiatives fail from a lack of leadership alignment. And I think that leadership alignment comes from having a really well-functioning team with the growth mindset at the top. And then I think, I've been part of businesses where we had this going on, and we talked about it a little bit earlier. And I would say how we knew it is you start to see stagnant areas of the business that are creating adverse customer experiences, or you're having some growth challenges, or teams that their engagement scores are low. So I think engagement scores, and actually the testing that you typically, or surveys that you put out to your company around engagement scores, can help identify this, as well as some of the business results. And you can, once you know that you have a problem, you could actually ask yourself, as I'm digging into this problem, am I seeing it's because of a certain mindset? And how can we then culturally seek to shift the mindset so that as a business we're embracing that growth mindset?
Mm. Oh, excellent. Well, this has been a great conversation. I'd love to hear what three things you want to leave behind, Jessica.
So I'd say the three things to leave behind are: one, really taking the space to assess, are you in a growth mindset or a fixed mindset, and how's that performing for your team? Does the team demonstrating a fixed or growth mindset, and what's one action that you could take to change that? I'd say number two would be talking about the that ability to set that kind of tone with your team of it's okay to fail. So that wins or oopses
Mm.
action at the beginning of a meeting is a great thing to try. And then I would say the last thing would be just to take some time to be vulnerable.
Mm.
Think about what's one action that you could take, or thing that you could share, that would make you vulnerable to the team, and challenge yourself to do it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. How can folks learn more about what you do or get in contact with you?
Yeah, so just LinkedIn. I'm Jessica Reeser Osborn on LinkedIn, and I always welcome connections and followers. So please come find me there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jana.
Yeah. And to our audience, until next time, keep your organizations healthy.